Welcome to the Solo Mo Show, a weekly podcast hosted by Corey O'Brien, the social media strategist at Heat and author of thefutureofads.com.
And I'm Adam Helway, CEO of the digital marketing agency Secret Sushi Creative.
Each episode, we discuss the intersection of social, local, and mobile. Our goal is to help you understand these topics so you can integrate them into your marketing and advertising. Today is March 20th, 2012, and this is episode number 11. How's it going, Adam?
It's going all right. How you doing, Corey?
It's going well, going well. It has been just a few short days since we recorded our last episode.
I know, I was thinking the same thing. I'm like, why is it seems like just yesterday that we just did the last episode and got that sucker up. But that we did pretty good. That was the first week that we kind of all had to shift when we recorded the episode, and we made do and did it on a Friday night. I guess we don't have anything better to do on a Friday night. But
Well, you gotta catch back up eventually. If it's not Friday, then you're like, I don't really want to do it on Saturday, and then Sunday rolls around, and suddenly you miss the whole week. So you gotta squeeze it in there when you can.
That's true. That's very, very true. And what else has been going on with you this week? Well, I'd say, what's been going on with you since I talked to you last Friday?
Well, lots of playing with the new iPad. Got that thing up and running.
Same here.
It still has that feeling of like my eyes have just instantly adapted to it, and now that's how all screens should look. The problem that I'm finding is now when I use my iPhone, it's got a Retina screen, it looks nice. When I use my iPad, Retina screen, that looks nice. Suddenly I'm looking at my computer and my laptop on a day-to-day basis at work, and I'm like, oh, this thing is so blurry and pixelated. Where's the Retina screen for this thing?
One of these days, I mean, if they can get it as big as the iPad, they said, what was it, a couple years ago, it had to have been when the iPhone 4 came out with the Retina display. Everybody was like, anticipating. So when are they going to do it for a phone? For the iPad? And they said, oh, it could never be done. And I personally don't. I thought I was a techie, but I didn't know enough to know whether or not it could actually be done. But I knew if anybody could do it, it's going to be Apple. So the interesting thing I'm seeing is everybody's asking me. My friends are asking me, so is it worth it? Should I upgrade? Which, does it really matter? What's so cool about it and everything? I'm pretty straightforward about whether or not they really need it. I think there's a lot of hubbub out there, and I think it's primarily from those folks that don't like Apple, period, about whether or not something like the screen is something to kind of consider revolutionary or make such a big hubbub about. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like I said, it's funny because even myself using it, I'm like, well, it just feels natural. It doesn't feel like this mythical object that every moment is reminding you that it's this, made of unobtainium or whatever. It just feels very natural. You click right over into like this is just how it should feel mode. And so, I can see where the complaints of, it's not revolutionary come from, but I think part of what makes it so impressive is the fact that it's not beating you over the head with like, look how impressive and awesome I am. It's this usable device that, instantly kind of melts into your everyday workflow.
Yeah, I mean, I think really the thing to think about, or not to think about, but for people, this is one of those features that those who really understand technology kind of are like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. And those who have, like, for instance, never had an iPad might never understand the difference, right? It's like an upgrade in printing technology. You don't really realize it unless you maybe held two of them side by side and you went, oh, well, that one's better than that one because, I don't know, the quality's better. And you go, well, no, this was actually impossible before. And so in the long run, I think that like the benefits are like if you use it heavily, for instance, if you use your iPad heavily and you use it for reading, of course, it's things like reduced eye strain over a long period of time. That type of stuff is just kind of a subtle benefit of seeing stuff obviously clearly.
Yep.
It's not just like, oh, well, hey, it looks crisper than the old one. That's about it. But there is having the transmitted light from the iPad and so on definitely has a different effect on your eyes than reading it off of, a paper with reflective light and kind of crisper type and so on. So I didn't buy it just for the Retina display myself. I think you might have bought it regardless just for the Retina display yourself.
Right.
But I think that's kind of one of the added benefits of not only does it look more beautiful kind of in all of its different ways when all the apps that you you like are finally starting to upgrade to the Retina displays, and the web pages themselves look crisper. But just the reduced eye strain of like looking at fuzzy type all the time, for instance, makes a big difference.
Yeah.
But I don't want to kind of go off on that tangent now about the iPad, because we did that the last 2 weeks in a row, and we've already eaten probably 5 minutes doing that.
I know, we could go all day.
Yeah, I know we could go all day. So you tell me how you want to start today's episode.
Well, you know what app I'm looking forward to on this new Retina display iPad is the Pinterest app. Pinterest in HD. Sounds like it couldn't get much better than that, right?
Yeah, it's not much fun on the iPhone app is pretty cool, but it's I think it's underwhelming in a couple areas because it doesn't have the exact same experience that the website does.
Right.
There are some cool parts of the website that it's definitely missing, and so we'll see if they can kind of take advantage of the larger form factor and bring that to light in a much more kind of parallel fashion to what's on the website, and maybe take advantage of some things on the iPhone or the iPad that go beyond just using the web.
Yeah, definitely. And one thing from Pinterest that caught my eye, other than the redesign, so obviously they recently rolled out new profile pages for all users that shifted things around a little bit. It takes the most recent pin from each board and makes that a little bigger. They shifted the placement of some of the users' information, so the places that you can look to find out how many pins they have, how many likes they have, that type of thing, how many followers. They moved that all kind of closer to the top. They actually have a really interesting new section called Repins From that gives you the 3 users that the user you're looking at gets a majority of their content from. That's a new way of discovering users, and considering before they really didn't have any way of discovering users outside of just looking at other pins and seeing who had originally pinned it, I think that's a really interesting addition to the site. But those changes aside, the thing that actually really caught my eye in terms of Pinterest news this week was a Lowe's commercial, of all things. And so I was watching a TV show with my wife, and this Lowe's commercial comes on, and I'm sort of half paying attention to it. As always, the commercials come on, and you sort of talk about other things or talk about the show. And at the very end of the commercial, this logo caught my eye, and I grabbed the remote, and we have DVR, so I rewind it, and I'm like, hold on, we got to go back a second. So I rewind this thing, and go back 5 seconds, and then right when the logos all come up, I pause it, and sure enough, right in between the Facebook logo and the Twitter logo at the end of this Lowe's commercial is a Pinterest logo. And I'm like, really? Pinterest has already reached the level where, major brands are putting it on the end of their TV spot? And apparently so. I went to YouTube and found this commercial, and sure enough, there it is on the YouTube version as well. So apparently Lowe's has fully committed themselves to being a brand that's going to be on Pinterest, and they're going to promote the brand. And it's interesting looking at the numbers that you see come out of Pinterest. You see these numbers like, there's 20 plus million or 25 plus million users and growth and everything. And you're like, okay, well, it must be this promised land for marketing. But when I actually looked up the Lowe's page, it only has 3,800 followers. So despite the fact that they've already, put the logo on their commercials and are really committing themselves to putting out a lot of content there, it still is just this early stage of the growth of Pinterest where I think the door is open for a lot of brands to take advantage of this growth and, do something like Lowe's has done. What do you think about a big brand putting Pinterest in their commercial? Too soon, or?
I mean, but really, how much real estate in your commercial did the little logo at the end take?
Yeah, but it's not. I mean, you could have used that real estate for a Tumblr logo or a RSS logo. There's a lot of other channels that they could have given that real estate to.
I mean, but nobody's really used any other channels in a long time on there. I mean, it's very, very common now to see a Twitter or a Facebook logo at the end. I'm trying to think if there's been any other. We haven't even seen anybody use like a Google Plus one. Right. We haven't at all. I don't think it's like risky or any of that kind of stuff. I think like, boom, just put it up there. You want to have a presence up there. You think it's appropriate place. It's very, so I had seen the commercial a whole bunch of times this last week. It's a fairly new commercial.
Yep.
And I remember seeing it a number of times this week. Never ever realized that Pinterest logo was there. So you got much better eyes than I do. And you had that DVR and you're like, holy smokes, what's that red, what's that red logo there? But I think that's kind of like low hanging fruit. It's an easy thing to do to slap a social logo on there. It's one of those things where like you can't even really track it.
Right.
You just kind of put it up and hope that it'll add. It's a new commercial, so therefore let's throw the newest stuff up on it. It's low hanging fruit. It doesn't intrude on what we're doing on the commercial. And, worst case scenario, nobody goes to our Pinterest page. Best case scenario, it drives some awareness that we're actually, on Pinterest.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think it's interesting that a brand recognized it as a large brand like Lowe's, and that they put it on their site. On their commercial. But I want to see them do something bigger if they're going to bring it to the television or some mainstream media. I want to see them do something bigger than just simply slap a logo at the end. I personally think that slapping a logo to the end of commercials is a half executed. Half executed. I'm trying to censor what I'm trying to say. It's a really half way of connecting people to your social profiles. And I say that because what's the value? Why do I want to go there?
Right.
Am I that compelled to go check you out that you're there? I mean, what's going to compel me to come over and check out your Twitter or your Facebook presence or your Pinterest presence just because you have a logo there? So I think it's super low hanging fruit. And I think it does give a little bit of validity to Pinterest. But I guess like for instance, Shazam. When you do something with Shazam, it's a little bit different in that sense. There's a compelling reason why a commercial would have a Shazam logo on it, because it's saying you interact with this content and you will get something in the end.
Yep.
In most cases, it sounded like, based on our discussion of the Super Bowl, that what you got was really just a link someplace to some marketing page.
Right.
But yeah, I think it's the same. There's some validity to the brand, to the fact that you're now seeing companies say, "Look, this is one of the social profiles that we have online. You should come check us out." Yeah,
and I guess so. I see your point. I think had they done a commercial that was like, hey, look, we're the source of all types of ideas from, I'm looking at the boards right here. We've got gardening tips and pet projects and, ideas for outside your home. And if you want to check those out, go to pinterest.com/Lowe's. That would have been a much larger statement than just slapping the logo on the end. So I agree with you there. It's sort of the very, very small step into the shallow end of the pool. And they haven't, fully committed to being like, we're the brand that's going to own Pinterest.
They still have their floaties on and they're holding on to the edge.
Exactly. So. They're doing kicks on the edge just to get the feel for it. But I think the true test for them, I actually saw, so I can't remember if it's the end of that same commercial or another commercial I came across when I was looking at YouTube, but they've put together this sort of a combination of catalog / idea book. And I think it's actually available as an iPad app. So you go and you get this iPad app and you can flip through it, and it's kind of more magazine based than just, hey, here's a catalog with all our prices.
Yeah.
And so I wonder, I wish I would have taken the time to actually dive into this. I'll have to report back next week, but it makes me wonder if they're going to do something similar to what we saw The Gap do, which is really optimize that catalog or that magazine for sharing on Pinterest. Because I think that would be really interesting if they, were putting the effort towards designing and putting out this magazine, and then in addition said, well, if we're going to do that, let's take the time to really optimize what's in there and make sure that if somebody wants to share it on Pinterest or on a blog or on Tumblr, that, the end result of that is very positive towards our brand.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about Google. Google had a couple of interesting announcements, one of which was Google Analytics with social ROI. And Of course, that's a big eye catcher. I saw this thing all across Twitter and all across the blogosphere as everybody's like, "Oh, Google, ROI, social." You know, those are like you throw those three words together and people are going to talk about this thing.
Yep.
But essentially, Google added, you know, not a huge change in my opinion, but they optimized their Google Analytics product in order to start to gather some social data and actually work towards getting ROI out of that data. So it's essentially kind of, I think, as far as I understand, the blog post was actually a little confusing, which gets back to a topic we discussed before, which is being clear in your description of things. But from what I understand, you're kind of just putting tags on things to alert Google Analytics, hey, this traffic's coming from Twitter, this traffic's coming from Facebook, and then it can track it through your typical Google Analytics system. And then if it ends up in a conversion or an assisted conversion, which kind of boils down to basically saying it results in a sale, you can assign a dollar figure to that sale and thus figure out how many sales and how much revenue is generated from your social media efforts, thereby generating an ROI number for those social efforts. And it sounded like you were actually really interested in this news, possibly towards, you know, using it for your clients. So what was your opinion on the announcement from Google?
I mean, I think I really have to dive deep into it and check out how it applies to myself or clients, you know, and so far I've really gotten as far as the pretty lengthy blog posts that they have. But I think that if it really is done right, and, you know, it's not just some little add-on. I think if it's really done right, then it could be an extremely important tool for everybody to use. I mean, it's Google Analytics is something just about everybody uses on their site. It's free. It's got a lot of detail in it. You know, you could customize it and add your goals and a number of other things to kind of get it to give you the type of data that you'd like to have. Of course, there's plenty of other platforms out there that you could use as well. But for the most part, it's a given that folks are going to want to put, you know, Google Analytics in. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's important to be able to look at this. I mean, just last week I ended up speaking at an event, and we had the one guy in the back who was just saying, "Well, how does this all equate to, you know, to dollars?" We were talking kind of on a more broader scale, perspective on using social for marketing or using it for customer service or whatever it may be. And he says, "Well, how do we measure this? How do we, you know, equate this to dollars?" And there's other ways that people have done so in the past. But this may help to kind of push us more in the direction of kind of validating that to the folks that still are always just kind of, I don't believe that this, you know, brings sales to the bottom line. I don't believe that this equates to dollars. I think the whole concept of this assisted social conversions, I don't know if I've ever heard that term used before, mm-hmm. But I think that that's an important concept for people to understand and realize. And if Google is kind of putting it out there and bringing it to the forefront, then again, when we get back to that whole kind of validity thing we just talked about with Pinterest, it could add some validity to the term and to the concept of assisted social conversions, because, you know, not every conversion is going to be the first touch point that somebody comes to your site. Yeah. And so I think those are the things that I'm really interested in, and I want to kind of take it through its paces. You said something about tagging content. Maybe I missed that, but I thought that my understanding was that it was already taking care of it all kind of on its own and didn't actually need you to. I mean, of course, you'd want to set up goals and such so that you could equate it to dollars. But do you, in fact, have to set up content with some sort of tags or you know, append something to it in order for it to track it properly?
No, I think if you already have Google Analytics set up, then I think this automatically applies. I was more saying that if you were going from zero to now installing Google Analytics, that you have to add kind of tags along the way, specifically to keep track of these full conversions or assisted conversions. Okay. Assisted conversions, just to clarify for the listeners, is when you click from a social site to a URL or to a website, but then you leave in between when you first click and when you actually make the purchase. So you don't click on a site, go through the sales funnel, and end up buying something. You essentially land on the site, look around, leave, and then later come back to complete your purchase. They count that as an assisted conversion. And so, I think you have to make sure that you've set up tags along the way that are tracking a user to say, okay, well, they landed on, the home page, and then they clicked into the about page, and then they left. And now, we see them come back, click through a couple more pages, and finally click to buy, and then land on the confirmation screen. You have to kind of alert Google at each step along the way what's happening. But once you've set that up, then I think it automatically pulls in and differentiates between social data and just a typical visitor.
And I think the fact that they did, so it's a bit of that. There's the conversion tracking from social traffic, and the like you just said, the reference which you referenced was the social conversion, the assisted conversion, and then they have they call it the social plugins kind of tracking, so you can take a look at. You got tweet buttons and Google Plus buttons and Facebook likes and so on, and share buttons on your blog or on your website, and they can track that and actually see I believe on a page by page basis how people are interacting with that content. And they give a couple ideas as to how you could also use it for things like A/B testing and seeing like what configurations get the most sharing activity from folks, and then. That last part is the activity stream, as they call it. What's actually happening away from your website based on URLs, to your website. So they could take a look at a URL and then track social interactions that are happening with it and tell you, if there's been they use a lot of Google Plus references here, of course,
right?
But they make it. They it's pretty apparent that they're supposed to be any social channel, supposedly.
Yeah.
So let's hope that they don't, get upset at Mark Zuckerberg or something and decide to keep that out of the equation. But I think they're hitting the right touch points in all the different areas. And some people are going to care about only one of these things. Some people are going to care about, all of these things. But I personally think that they're all important, and being able to take a look at what's going on with your social media efforts, specifically on your site, and tying it directly to a place where it's really the hub of where you're collecting your metrics for your site as it is. Putting it all into one place makes it easier. Integrating it all together makes it easier than obviously having it siloed in a different system of some kind. Or in most cases, if you were to do this on your own, you would have either very expensive comprehensive system that's taking care of things that you still would have to correlate to your Google Analytics, or maybe they would have analytics pulled into it, or you'd have to have a handful of other methods to pull this information together and and then correlate it again with your Google Analytics. So pulling it together into Google Analytics into one place is pretty cool. And if this is only their first step, which it likely is, and maybe 6 months from now or a year from now, things will get even better. So it's good to see a big cat like Google doing it.
Yeah, definitely. And that activity stream that you talked about, where they're pulling in social data from, all sorts of areas, they list their growing list of social data hub partners, which prior to this post, I had never even heard of the social data hub. It's apparently something that Google has put together as a way for social networks and social channels to share data between one another. And then they go on to list such well-known brands as Badoo, which I admit to having never heard of before, Discuss and Echo, which I have heard of before, Hatena, which I can't even pronounce, and then Meetup. So sort of hit or miss in terms of services that people are actually using to a significant degree. But notably absent from that list, like you said, was both Facebook and Twitter. So the two channels that I would have to imagine for most companies are driving the most traffic, the most conversation, are notably absent from the activity stream. So while I do think Google is taking steps in the right direction, and I like the idea that you're sort of bringing all the data into a dashboard that people are already using. I don't think this eliminates all steps because you've still got to find a way to go out and see, okay, well, what are people saying about us on Facebook? What are people saying about us on Twitter? And keeping track of those conversations as well. So fingers crossed that eventually all these companies play nice together and share data. But for now, there's definitely still a rift between Google and its Google Plus and Facebook and Twitter and their data.
So you just let the air out of my tires there. That sucks. I was looking at their link for the who is using the social data hub. That's what they call their social data hub partners, like you said. And yeah, they're all kind of, folks like Dig and Blogger and Typepad and such. Mm-hmm. It's really, the big cats are really missing still on this.
Pinterest and
yeah, Pinterest. When they add that to Google Analytics, that'll be the day.
It's over. That's it. Everybody's just moving over to Google Analytics. Call that race done.
Exactly. Nice.
So another thing, and it sounds like you had played with this tool before, so I'm not sure if it's brand new or just had a new change to it or what. But Google Plus Ripples, since we're on the topic of Google, I stumbled across this. I think somebody linked to it in a tweet, or it might have actually been while I was looking at Google Plus, ironically enough. But came across this tool called Google Plus Ripples, which actually allows you to put in a URL and see all of the conversation about that URL that's happened on Google+. And I really thought this was interesting. This wasn't something that I had seen before. There were similar services in the past that have done similar types of things. I think Backtype was one of them that would try to track your URL through the online world. But was this something that you had a chance to play with before, Adam, or was this new to you as well?
The console that you shared with me was new to me, where you could just basically put any piece of content in there and check it out. Mm-hmm. Ripples has been around for quite some time. I mean, felt like a long, long time ago, but really Google Plus hasn't been around that long. But I remember that they had released it a while back and had an announcement. And I think actually when you go to a post on Google Plus, you can actually, I think there was in one of the little side drop downs, the kind of hidden area, mm-hmm. that you can actually click it and open it up and say, check out the ripple. And I remember looking at, for instance, somebody like Robert Scoble, who was getting a lot of action on the content that he was sharing. You would obviously see much more activity happening than my own personal posts, for instance.
Right.
And so like right now I'm actually trying to check out again. It's just not working. This console is not working for me today. I found a great post that I think we'll probably want to put in our show notes, called 10 amazing Google Plus ripples to check out. And, that has a bunch of links to view ripples from well-known folks and celebrities. There's, Felicia Day, will.i.am, Larry Page, the Dalai Lama. And so I'm trying to look at these, and for whatever reason, it's still not loading on my end, even when I'm clicking directly on one of these Ripple links. But it was basically a rough visualization. I mean, you've seen it already, it sounds like, but this visualization of how the content spread from one person to the other, kind of, there's a little ripples of waves in a pond or something like that, how it rippled out. And you can use, from what I remember a while back ago, kind of a scrubber to see in kind of real time. As you scrub through the timeline, you could see how things spread from person to person to person, see the name of the people who shared it, and you click on their profiles and see the post directly.
Yeah. And that's essentially, what I'm looking at here for the Google Plus ripples. What I think is interesting, well, there's a couple things actually. The first off is that it actually starts to identify what I guess we could call influencers, basically people that their post resulted in a large number of other posts, and they actually represent that visually. So the ripples are bigger. It's a terrible analogy, but the ripples get bigger as you get more influential, or you reach more people with your splash, I guess, if we want to continue on this water-based metaphor that Google has tried to set up. So, you throw your rock in the middle of the lake. It's like, how big of a rock did you throw? How big was the splash? How many other things in that lake were affected by your ripple?
But the Dalai Lama essentially did a cannonball into Google.
The Dalai Lama did a cannonball, caused a massive tidal wave. It swept the shore. It increased the size of the lake. Exactly. But you can not only see, the different circles, so the size of the influence of the people that were involved, but you can see directional sharing arrows. So you can see when one user who was influential shared it to another user who was influential, who then shared it to their own group of followers. So you can really kind of watch links spread through the system. They've got a little chart that shows spikes in traffic, and then they actually they label each spike with the name of the user that caused that spike. So really just a lot of interesting data. And with Google Plus, so the way that I was playing around with it, and the way that I would imagine as a first step for a lot of people, you can just put a top level domain. So if you really want to see a lot of data, just plug in google.com into this tool, and you can see all the people that have talked about Google recently. But much like the Pinterest tool that we had talked about earlier, where you can view all of the different pins that have come from your URL, if you plug in the URL for your website, you can actually see all of the things people have said about it, all of your sort of influential users on Google Plus that have talked about your URL, and then who, when they say something, who responds to that. So you can kind of get a 10,000 foot view on all of the conversation going on about your company via its URL through Google Plus ripples. And I thought that was a really interesting, use of data on Google's behalf. It's not flawless. It's sort of a bit clunky, and it feels like it's not grabbing all of the possible data. I put in Google Plus, which you'd imagine has hundreds of thousands of posts every day, and it's probably just pulling in maybe 30 different posts. So there's a lot that's kind of slipping by, but at the very least, it's giving you just some interesting data to look at, and at least a couple of influential users to pull out and say, hey, this might be somebody that I want to reach out to directly.
Yeah, I finally got one of the pages working right now, and I thought before that they had a way to like just hit play and actually watch the action happen.
Yeah,
I'm not seeing that right now, but
that may be for. So it makes me wonder if Google Ripples has two functions. If you can put it in a URL and just see, like I said, Pinterest style, all of the different content, and that's one way of looking at it. Or if you look at a specific Google Plus post, if that brings in more of this timeline and you can track that post as it ripples through Google Plus, and if there's not actually two separate ways of viewing that data depending on what type of thing you're looking at.
Yeah, I'm looking, for instance, at if you want to look at the ripples on, for instance, anything that's shared, you can go to the little arrow, the little down arrow next to each post on Google Plus, and I just retested it because this was how I had done it before. Mm-hmm. And there's a little arrow, and when it drops down, it says things like link to the post or report abuse or whatever, and then it says view ripples at the very bottom, and so that's bringing me to one of the other posts here that I see from Louis Gray, for instance, who's very active on Google Plus and works for Google, in fact. But I'm not seeing the playhead, and so I'll have to kind of do some more investigation and see if they still have that available. But
I can see it here. I can see the playhead at the bottom, actually.
Oh, really?
It's way at the bottom, and it's not very clear. So
wow!
It's easy to miss.
It now. I think that what it is when you zoom in and out, instead you end up zooming in and out of those cells. Those to me it looks like looking under a microscope at all the social profiles there at the top.
Right.
But yeah, you're right. So there you go. So you've got the playhead, and you can go down and hit play, and as you do that, you can see the shares happening in real time. Mm-hmm. Above. So it's not well designed because the playhead is like below the fold of the page.
Yeah.
And then all the action that you want to watch is above. But at any rate, I completely agree with you. It's a good thing for folks to check out. relating to their content. They could use it for metrics. It's not something that people were broadly aware of.
Yep.
But it's a very cool thing to play with, and now that they have this place where you could just type in a URL, that makes a huge difference, because instead of like having to search for a piece of content that might have been shared from somebody from your site, or from a piece of content that you had, or you yourself obviously posting it first, you can just kind of spend time directly on that place where you can copy and paste URLs and see the results.
Yeah. So at the very least, check it out, and play around with it a little bit. And I don't think this is going to be the end-all be-all of social data tools, but it's at least interesting to see the types of data that Google gives you access to. And, hey, maybe you discover an influencer or two from it. So it's worth at least checking out.
True.
So let's move from one gorilla to the other and talk a little bit about Facebook, shall we?
Sure.
So Facebook had, as well, a number of big announcements come out in just the past few days, one of which still looks like they're rolling out. It's not a widespread feature yet, but Facebook Topics. And this is essentially Facebook putting into play their version of Twitter lists. So allowing people to aggregate both users and, actually, interestingly enough, pages into specific interests or topics. And then you can click on that to view your timeline, view your news feed just within that topic. So you could put together, let's say, entrepreneurs and group together a bunch of entrepreneurs that you liked following. And then when you click to that, it would just pull that specific data out of Facebook and build sort of a custom news feed on the fly. And what's also interesting about this is they're allowing people to then publish their own curated topic list. So the same as Twitter allows you to publish your list, Facebook is allowing you to publish topics, which then other users can follow. And you're then acting as the curator for this content that you think other people might be interested in following. What was your take on this announcement, Adam? Do you think it's a big move that's gonna really revolutionize the way that people use Facebook? Is it something that might get glanced over? What was your take on it?
I think it's actually a pretty big deal. I think it's a big deal because again, now they're starting to move into like a kind of a Twitter territory, more public content. The more public content that comes from them, the more public content that they start to kind of work with and kick around and make available to folks, the more that they intrude on the other players out there, Google and Twitter specifically. When I saw it, I ended up getting early access. They rolled it out to me, and I've only seen a couple other folks that have had it. And when I first actually had it pop up on my profile, there were only like 4 or 5 lists that anybody in my network had generated, because, as you were saying, these are lists where it has a tool. It asks you, who would you like to add to the list? And they could be people that are your friends, people that are, for instance, people you subscribe to. So in those cases, it may be not your friends, but it may be a journalist or an influencer that you wanted to subscribe to. And then you can also add pages. So you can add brand pages and add those to lists. So it's all pretty powerful. And the way that I see it changing things is, they made their first play in this direction when they made when they offered folks the ability to create to allow folks to subscribe to them. Mm-hmm. So they said, look, start make yourself available, allow people to subscribe to your public content, and in that and they've kind of in a way alluded to the fact that yes, that means you should also publish more public content. And so you saw a lot of people start to allow themselves to be subscribed to, of people that wanted to have more followers, quote unquote, similar to like a LinkedIn, Twitter. And then you saw them kind of also work a lot with like journalists and influencers and celebrities and say, look, if you have your own personal Facebook account, you can also just go ahead and let people subscribe to only your public information. And so subscriberships for folks started to expand. And when you wanted to become friends with somebody, instead of, when you click to become friends with them, that person would get an invitation or a notification that somebody wanted to connect with them and follow them and be a friend. But if you didn't accept it, then they wouldn't be able to become a friend per se, as in Facebook's sense, but they still were able to see any of your public posts. So they essentially became a subscriber.
Right.
And so Facebook started the whole process with that, and obviously it took off. There's people that have a lot of subscribers out there. There's people like Britney Spears, and then there's journalists, and then there's all these folks that are using that in lieu of an actual full blown like personal page, a brand page, which people were going out as celebrities or even as kind of web celebrities, folks that were popular on the web who had a following. They were influencers, and they couldn't have over 5,000 people become friends with them, but they had over 5,000 people who wanted to become friends with them. So they went ahead and created these pages. So at any rate, I think it's pretty much a bit of a game changer, because now not only are these lists going to entice people to potentially publish more public content if they'd like to use Facebook now as more of kind of a thought leadership and influencer channel. But the ability to go ahead and, for instance, add brand pages and stuff means that the content can potentially now grow even longer, more powerful legs as people now start to share these curated lists, and potentially folks are subscribing to the lists of their friends or the list of a celebrity or influencer. So, for instance, the first few folks that I saw who were creating lists were folks like Pete Cashmore, the founder of Mashable, and some other journalists out there who seem to have gotten early access and who really understand, for instance, awesome tech startups, awesome social media sites. I saw a lot of people taking and curating food brands and putting them together and calling it like recipes, and all the places that were commonly posting recipes on their brand page were then grouped into one interest list there as well. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's going to change the way that people look at publishing content of their own, both on their brands and personal pages, if they're, again, influencers or celebrities. I think you want to think about how you could curate your own lists and see if folks wouldn't mind subscribing to those lists, and curating together maybe a few folks that you think should be on that list, but then adding yourself to it, and you can actually see how many subscribers you get to it. You want to try to earn your way onto one of the influencers lists as well, because it could greatly increase the number of people that are actually looking at your content. So I think there's a lot of cool things that can happen from this. I want to see what happens as Facebook releases this to a broader audience, because there's a lot of people who just simply want to consume content. Yep. and they're not interested in curating. And those folks are going to, maybe if they get the concept, I think the way they've done it is quite simple and straightforward. So I think it'll be something that hopefully the average Facebook user will enjoy jumping on and trying out. So at any rate, I think it's actually a pretty big deal. We'll see what happens when it rolls out over a larger user base.
Yeah, and in my opinion, the list feature on Twitter is actually an underutilized feature. It's something that has a lot of use. It's a very useful feature. It makes the network a lot easier to use, but it's just something that a lot of people don't understand, and therefore they don't use it. They don't create lists. They don't subscribe to lists. So I would love to see the idea of creating lists take off within Facebook, and a lot of that will depend on their implementation. But it seems like they're taking steps in the right direction. So I would just say that for anybody that gets access to this, really put some work into at least creating one really solid list, and ideally that would be around your industry that you're trying to market. So if you're a financial company, put together a really good list of analysts and companies in the space and people that others should pay attention to, and then put that out there and really try to promote it and say, hey, I've gone through and done the work for you and put together this great list. All you need to do is subscribe to it, and you'll be, seeing some of the great insights and the great data that I have access to. And hopefully without a lot of work, you can actually create something that has a lot of value for people that do take the time to understand these Facebook topics and subscribe to it and embrace that as part of their using Facebook. And, it really also feels like something that's catered towards brands. This isn't something that individuals are going to use necessarily. You're not going to put together a topic of, my best friends forever, and then post that out there and expect people to subscribe to it. It's really looking at those people that are active as brands on places like Twitter and places like Google Plus, and saying, okay, well, as Facebook, how can we cater to this user? And they ended up with this Facebook topic. So, if you put yourself in that grouping, if you consider yourself somebody that uses Facebook to promote yourself, to promote your business, I would say this is something that you should jump all over and really embrace and try to get the most out of it.
And this kind of is something, again, to add to our show that we do all about early adopters. But I think there's an advantage, of course, to jumping on board in regards to curating your list and so on ahead of time, because right now, for instance, when I went, there was only a limited amount of lists that were available, and they were curated, by a few folks that were on there that had early access. And so those were the ones that I said, oh, well, I want to check it out. So the field of choices was very minimal. Yep. And that's going to be the same thing that happens. And it actually happens across many social networks that, those who get in there first and those who try it out, that's kind of an early advantage, of course. Is that, you're there before all the rest of the folks jump in and start doing things like curating boards on Pinterest or on Google Plus, for instance. When everybody's jumping on there trying to find interesting people to follow, your profile is there. It's got some information. It's already got some activity. So it's almost like you're there welcoming them and waving your hand saying, hey, how's it going? I left a little present here for you. And if it really just doesn't take much more than probably a half hour and a half effort at the most, for you to just carefully curate something, I'd say go for it and see, if you could be that one great list on a particular niche group of folks that, are talking about a product or particular brands that are dealing with a particular product or service or whatever tickles your fancy. But I say get in there and do it as soon as you have an opportunity.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. So one other Facebook story that I wanted to make sure that we address this week, because it pretty much hits on all three parts of the show. It's social, it's local, and it's mobile, is Facebook's revamping of their location API. So we'll include a link to this story in the show notes. The story itself, I will admit, is somewhat confusing. It's sort of a mix of technical. It's not really written for the everyday consumer, but the gist of it is that Facebook wants to become the backbone for all location-based services. They want to be the storehouse of data through which other services both drop off new data and pull out old data or data from other networks, basically making Facebook the middleman for the transfer of all social data. And I think part of why this is interesting is it really opens up opportunities for a lot of these apps to share data back and forth in a way that really wasn't possible before. So for instance, if you use, let's say, Instagram to post a photo to a specific location, what Facebook is trying to enable is that then an application like, let's say, Foursquare could actually access that data through Facebook and pull that into your Foursquare check-in. So it's really enabling information to go back and forth from one system to another. And then it all eventually gets logged onto Facebook. And they've actually, I'm not sure if this is a brand new feature, but it's something relatively new, which is a map of all of your location information, and it breaks it down into different points such as life events, trips, places lived, and then photos that are tagged to specific locations. And each of these points actually is represented by a pin on this map, and you can click on that pin and it pulls up all sorts of data about that bit of information. And so what Facebook is trying to do is really fill out these maps for all of their users by allowing other applications to submit data. So they realized, hey, nobody's checking in through through Facebook. People are checking in through Foursquare instead. People aren't always tagging the photos that they upload with a location, but pretty much everything inside of Instagram gets tagged with location. So rather than trying to force people to geotag all of their Facebook information, let's just grab all the other information that's out there that is geotagged, pull it into our map, and then as a way of enticing developers to jump on board, we'll offer that information back out so that they can make their applications more useful as well. So, we're just seeing the early ramifications of that, but I wouldn't be surprised if, a couple months down the road, we're seeing really interesting use cases for this as applications start to share data back and forth. Have you played around with any of the geolocation stuff built into Facebook, Adam?
Well, I've seen the changes specifically to Foursquare data that's being pulled in now. Mm-hmm. So it seems to be displayed in a more rich fashion than it was before. I've been waiting for them to do this. We're talking from a personal user perspective rather than, say, an advertising or marketing perspective. When I would check in I'd have to check in at Foursquare and then check in over on Facebook as well if I wanted, for instance, to capture that check-in, the location and all that stuff associated with it on my Foursquare timeline for kind of, going back and looking at it at a later date and saying I was there with friends or whatever it may be. And I like to do it on Foursquare in general. And so I felt like I had to check in more than one place every single time that I went someplace. And I knew that eventually they had to kind of kick it up a notch and say, look, we're going to show this in a more rich fashion. You're already checking in someplace else. Why not piggyback it? I think the most compelling thing that you were saying is how they are kind of trying to be this hub of that data and saying, look, here, we'll take it, we'll display it nice and beautiful, but at the same time, we'll just kind of make it available if anybody wants to also use it and pull it back out. So instead of creating potential development partnerships between these other companies, Facebook is kind of that pool of data and is making it available via their API. It's an interesting strategic thing for Facebook themselves to be doing. I think it takes a lot of. I kind of commend them for having realized that their check-ins weren't kind of catching on as much as somebody like a Foursquare, and that there's also all these other opportunities for location-based data and context being pulled from stuff like, just like you said, from anything from food spotting to Instagram. Or basically anything that has location data on it, which nowadays is pretty much any mobile service. So at any rate, I think, like you said, it'll be really, really interesting to see how folks start to use it in the future. How it ties into what you're already doing on Facebook as a Facebook user and somebody who likely shares from some of these other channels, so some of these other services onto Facebook. But ultimately, how can brands leverage this, right? How can developers jump on there, take advantage of what's available in the API now that Facebook is really kind of saying, well, we're going to do this, but our payoff on this is really that we're going to have much more rich social data across multiple channels, not just our own, which didn't seem to get as much play as we had hoped.
Yeah, definitely. That's actually something I hadn't really considered, but that's a good point of, for those brands that do develop mobile applications or do develop social applications, it might be time to re-examine your strategy towards geolocation and, say, hey, it's not just what types of pins or badges can I sponsor on Foursquare. I might actually be able to create an app that feeds into some of this existing data on Facebook and pulls it back out in an interesting way, or contributes to this data in some way, because once that data is in this pool, it becomes available to other applications as well. So there could be some value there. So that's an interesting take on it. And for those that have the development chops to explore in that direction, I would definitely recommend it.
Sure thing.
Cool. So one story that really caught my eye this week, and it was more of a less of a news announcement like we've been discussing, and more of just a general culture piece. It was actually published by the New York Times. And the title of this article was Younger Shoppers Using Technology, Not Salespeople. And I thought it was interesting and wanted to bring it up on the show because as I was reading this, I was really nodding along. This fit into exactly the way that I myself shop, which was the idea that, especially for the younger generation, when they're going to a store and they're, browsing around and doing their shopping, a lot of times they don't at all want to be bothered by a salesperson. They want to use their phone as if it's their personal shopper. So whether it's looking up prices at competing stores or sharing pictures with friends and saying, how does this look on me? Or, just comparing the actual kind of specs and data around a product that you often can't get just by looking at the box or talking to a salesperson. You've essentially created these hyper-informed consumers that are going into a shop less to hear the opinion of the salesperson and more just to touch and feel the product that they're interested in buying, having already done their research at home, and then bringing that research along with them. I thought this was a really interesting trend and something that could potentially have big implications for anybody that does have a storefront or does employ salespeople as a way of interacting with consumers. What was your take on this story, Adam?
I thought it was awesome. There were so many actually, and for those who are listening, please check out the link on the site once we get the episode up. But there's so many different examples that they had that I felt were really interesting. Everything from let's see, folks adding Wi-Fi to the store. So Nordstrom had added Wi-Fi to most of its stores so that they could essentially released an application that was helping shoppers, and they found that shoppers weren't always using it outside. They were actually also bringing it into the store, and they were using it to assist them while they were in the store. And so in order to help that experience, make that experience smoother and easier, they made sure that all the stores had Wi-Fi so that the average person could come in and actually use their application faster. I mean, that's really kind of a little thing, but it makes a difference in the experience that somebody has. They talked about some other stores that had iPads with all kinds of information about their products, but they had not restricted those iPads to only access, say, an app or some information about that product, about their products or services or whatever it may be. They actually allowed it to be open. So with the intention of letting the shopper feel that they weren't being potentially limited or restricted in their experience.
Yep.
If they decided they wanted to, I don't know, communicate with other folks, or if they wanted to price shop elsewhere, I'm not sure. I mean, I look at price shopping, for instance, as kind of the biggest potential problem with some of these places, because if you're going to go into the store and it costs X, and then you go and you look online and find out you can get it shipped to you for 20% off or 30% off. I guess the bottom line is as long as it's not a competitor's product, if somebody knows that they want that product that's there and they may get a better deal elsewhere, at least it's still a sale.
Right. And I think, a lot of brands, it felt like for a while they were trying to combat that trend of somebody coming in the store and just saying, no, I don't need help. I just want to browse. And what that was really saying is, I just want to look at it and then buy it off Amazon. And so their response was, well, let's, make sure we surround this person by salespeople and essentially, make sure that they can't leave without our salespeople kind of pressuring them into a sale. And I think what this article is saying is, look, you've got to understand that people are going to price shop, but you can't just fight that by putting salespeople in front of them, because a lot of time, the salesperson isn't going to have as much information as this person has already brought along with them just by pulling up your store or your product details on their iPhone. So,
and although they should, right? I mean, they really should be really great and understand all the products and services. But unfortunately, you've probably had experiences like this in the past that they just don't.
Right.
And so that's, like you're saying, that's folks have folks are doing tons of research, or if they're really passionate about a brand, they've got that information already. And it's really hard to scale those few folks actually on a per brand or per store basis to be out there and be available to help customers. But they talked about, I think, wasn't it the Samsung folks in Best Buy? How they were having some kiosks or some devices there, so that in Best Buy, if somebody was looking at Samsung products, whether, I don't know, be TVs or tablets or something like that, that they could actually connect directly to Samsung and to a Samsung expert and video chat with them.
Yeah.
I mean, that's different, obviously, than just simply having the device there so that you could browse around on interactive content. I mean, it's helping scale the experience of talking to an actual expert on the product. Because how many times do you get frustrated with going to a place like Best Buy or another kind of large store that's just got tons and tons of choice, and finding that the person selling it to you isn't able to answer your questions, or give you kind of the proper information to compare to two products or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and I think, for anybody that hasn't had an opportunity to, I would say the best way to get a feel for the sort of extreme version of how this could work is to walk into an Apple store. And with an Apple store, their first step in this direction was to put an iPad next to each one of their products. And so rather than having a salesperson come up and have to interrupt that process of exploring a product and kind of playing with it on your own, the person can just browse through all the features and the specs and actually watch videos about the product right there on this iPad. But what they've enabled is each iPad also then has a giant button that says, call for help. And so if you're playing with this thing and you have a question that maybe hasn't been addressed by that experience, or you just, you want to ask somebody anecdotally, like, is this the right product for me? You just click this button and it alerts the sales staff, and somebody politely comes over and says, hey, I noticed that you have a question. Is there something that I could help you with? And it's a very seamless and fluid interaction. And, going into an Apple store, I don't feel like I'm going to have to fight off all these salespeople. I know that, hey, if I do have a question and I do need somebody, they're there. But at the same time, if I don't have a question, and as is often the case, I don't want to talk to anybody, I don't have to come up with excuses and duck and dodge these people. They're just a button press away, but until I actually press that button, they don't have to come up and try to interact with me, which I really appreciate. Apple's actually then gone a step further, and they've created this whole crazy mobile application where you can actually buy and pay for the product using your mobile phone without ever interacting with somebody, and walk right out the store without talking to a single employee, which to this day still blows my mind and was still a little creepy the first time I used it. But, I think that is, if you want to sort of experience what the future of retail could look like, go through that experience and try that out and just see from a shopper's perspective how that makes you feel, and, how that sways your opinion towards Apple as a product.
Yeah, I think it's going to change the way people are going to have to rethink a little bit about what a sales rep actually does now.
Yeah, definitely.
And are they a facilitator of finding information within the store, right? Versus somebody who is there to, I don't want to say that most of the time people are, their job is to pressure people one way or another. That's not the case. At least years and years ago, that was how it felt. Nowadays, it's been a little bit, it's almost like it swung in the other direction, where they ask you, can I help you? And you say no, not because they're necessarily going to pressure you, but because they actually don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And so this could be something where that information that is maybe lacking on the part of the salesperson is also at the fingertips of themselves as well as the customer.
Yeah. My favorite data point from this article was it used Land Rover as an example. And, buying a car is obviously something that there's a lot of research and a lot of information gathering that goes into it. And so they said that in 2000, on average, a person made 7.5 visits to a dealer before placing an order. And by 2010, so just 10 years later, that figure was down to 1.3 visits. So from 7.5 to just a little over a single visit. And you've got to imagine that that was based almost entirely on the ability to go online and read Motor Trend reviews and check out Kelley Blue Book and read other, owners' reviews of this thing, to where you're no longer going in and you're sort of at the whim of the dealer to say, oh, is this the right car for me? You're going in there having done the research, having had an idea of the features you want. And really it's more about, okay, this person is going to help me through the transaction of actually purchasing it. It's less about this person is going to, help me make that decision. So I think it really changes the role of the customer company interaction, and it changes the role that a good salesperson takes in that process. And it doesn't mean that salespeople are going to go away. They still do play a valuable role, and they still, there's always going to be people that want that sort of hands-on experience. But I think it's up to companies to proactively reevaluate the way that they interact with customers in stores and make sure that that process fits into this new model of how people are, researching and then ultimately buying something from a store.
I think you hit it on the head when you said in a way that they are now kind of the facilitators of the transaction rather than the discovery, right? The when you look at the sales funnel, so to speak, and you look at something like Land Rover, you can assume that most of the hits, most of the visits that folks were making to the dealership were really more about discovery and trying to make a decision and trying to, weigh their options and all that kind of stuff. And now to bring that all down from 7.5 to, 1.3 visits, means that the reason that folks are coming is really just to seal the deal. And I think that could probably be said for any other brand, that somebody's already gone through much of that sales funnel and they're really towards the end of saying, like, I just need to come in now and actually make the purchase. And how can that sales rep or the device there or whatever help me make my purchase, but then potentially take advantage of some upselling while there in order to, rather than going through the whole thing of, oh, well, look at all these other choices. It's not other choices. It's potentially additional choices.
Yeah, definitely.
So what do we have left here?
I feel like we could probably call that a wrap. I think we've put in a solid hour, and if we dive into any more stories, it could get into dangerous territory. We could go on all night. So
we could always start talking about iPads again or something.
So actually, I wanted to give a shout out real quick. We got a comment via Twitter that I thought was appropriate for an earlier discussion. It came in from Patrick Goodman, who goes by the Twitter handle Marketing Musing. And it was about when we were talking about the Lowe's commercial, and he said, using a Facebook or a Twitter logo, use a Facebook or Twitter logo as long as you provide the full link. Without the link, it's like putting a phone logo without the number, which I thought was a pretty funny way of describing it. But it was basically saying, just having these logos at the end of your commercial, for a lot of people, they know, go to Google, plug in that username and that channel that you're trying to find. But it is very true that, including the full URL goes a long way towards smoothing out that interaction. And just sticking a Pinterest logo on there is putting a lot of faith in your viewers' ability to then go to Pinterest, find your channel, and work through that whole process. So, in my opinion, I think that sticking the logo as well as the URL is always a best practice. Just putting the logo on there, while aesthetically probably a little more pleasing in terms of usefulness, it decreases the usefulness of having it there significantly. But I could be swayed either way. What do you think, Adam? Should you always include the full URL, or do you think in some cases just including the logo is fine?
No, I agree. I think people don't include the URL because of aesthetics. They're trying to, again, it's low risk. They just put these little tiny logos on there. But the average person, for instance, Facebook's search kind of sucks.
Yep.
In most cases, for most brands, you're likely to find the page But it's just not the most intuitive. I don't think folks actually realize the average of the 850 million folks that are there. The average user doesn't actually, know that the search is there and what it does. And so, like you said, you're putting faith in folks and their ability to use the search tools and the various channels, especially something like Pinterest. Most folks don't realize exactly how to find a user on Pinterest. I don't think they're probably not leveraging the simple just kind of Pinterest / name as much as they could.
Yeah, I mean, just as an anecdote for this, you've always got to keep in mind that there's a significant number of users out there that when they want to go to a URL, instead of typing that into the address bar of their browser, they type that into the Google search box .com and all. So if you want to go to Pinterest, they type in pinterest.com into the Google search box, hit search, and then click on what is ultimately the first result on the top of the page. So, if you ever need a reminder that not everybody understands, oh, I see that logo, I know exactly where to go, just keep that in mind, that there's plenty of people, when they go to your website, they're probably getting there by searching for your .com inside of Google. So as even looking at the cloud example from last week, be blatantly clear and err on the side of being over explanative of the process and exactly what you need somebody to do in order to interact with you.
It's called don't make me think. That's the way to do it.
Yeah, exactly. Don't make me think. All right. Well, with that, I think that's about it. So I want to go ahead and thank everybody that had a chance to listen to this episode, both live and the recorded version. We appreciate you checking us out and hope that you found this episode and all other episodes especially useful in your daily marketing and advertising lives. If you'd like to interact with us, we would definitely appreciate that. And there's a number of ways that you can do so. The first would be through Twitter. So you can actually reach the show at Solo Mo Show, or you can reach myself directly. I'm at Corey O'Brien.
And I'm at Secret Sushi.
We have pages on both Facebook and Google+. And since I just said make it exceptionally easy to find, it's facebook.com/Solo Show. And what is it? plus.google.com/Solo Show, I believe. And if that's not correct, just go ahead and Google Solo Mo Show Facebook or Solo Mo Show Google+. We're out there, we promise, and hopefully we're not popular enough that people have tried to create fake Solo Mo pages to distract you. So if you search for Solo Mo Show...
Choose your poison.
Choose your poison, exactly. We are on both of those. And then finally, if you want to get in touch via email, we would happily accept that as well. You can reach us at solomoshow@gmail.com. Both Adam and I check that, so feel free to reach out there, give us your questions, give us your comments, give us your feedback.
Am I supposed to check that?
You could check it. I try to poke in every once in a while and just see if there's new email. And even if you just want to say hi, we encourage that as well. So reach out via email, via Facebook, via Google+, Twitter, any one of those. Just go ahead and reach out, and we will say hi, and would love to meet you. Would love to learn more about the people out there listening to this show. And then if we have one small request to make, it would be that if you do like the show, check it out on iTunes and give it a rating. That helps other people discover the show. It helps grow the audience. It helps make sure that the next time you bring up Solo Mo Show at a cocktail party, the person you're talking to has also listened because they are a huge fan of the show as well. So we would appreciate if you like the show, just head on over to iTunes and give it a rating. And with that, we will see everyone next week. And I think that's it.
All right, guys. Take care.
Thanks.